Special welcome to our three speakers, Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi, Dr. Adin Najam, and Ambassador Zamir. Pakistan's relations with the United States have been described as tumultuous over the years, ranging from alliance, military and economic aid, the process of disenchantment, several sanctions slapped on Pakistan, to the war on terror, and now in the wake of the Taliban's takeover of Kabul on the 15th of August this year. Whatever Pakistan's internal situation may be, the United States is a highly polarized society today, in which its relationship with Pakistan has to be forged after what many consider even within the United States as its humiliating defeat in Afghanistan. Pakistan has been called out for its role in Afghanistan. 22 Republican senators have introduced the legislation to impose sanctions on various parties, the bill has also asked the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, for his own assessment of Pakistan's role in supporting the Taliban to return to power in Afghanistan. I think that the official position of the US government is best reflected in the statements of Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. Before she arrived in Pakistan, she stated in India, which has now come close to the United States, that the US no longer sees itself building a broad-based relationship with Pakistan, where she was going. And she was going here for a specific and narrow purpose on talks on Afghanistan. Her focus was on seeking Pakistan's assistance for countering terrorism. Although later it was reported that many other issues were also discussed. Pakistan, on the other hand, has called for a balanced relationship with the United States based on security, trade, investment, energy, and regional connectivity. How the future pans out will be discussed by our speakers. Each speaker will have 20 minutes, and there will be a question and answer. The first speaker is Ambassador Dr. Maleeha Lodhi. Dr. Maleeha Lodhi is Pakistan's star diplomat. She has served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States of America on 2 occasions, as High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and as Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. She has therefore distinguished herself both in bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. Dr. Lodhi will speak on the main theme of this webinar, that is the future of Pakistan-US relations. Dr. Lodhi.
Thank you. Thank you, Masuma. And thank you to the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs. It's been a long time since I spoke at your forum, but I must commend you for all the hard work that you've done, even during this challenging period of the pandemic. And I'm delighted to see a great colleague, Ambassador Zamir Akram, joining us, and of course, a good friend, Adil Najam also. Let me start by saying that Pakistan-US relations are at another inflection point. This is arguably the 3rd time that the two countries are confronted with the challenge of redefining the relationship, which, as Masuma just said, has been so mercurial over time. The first time they needed to do this was after the Cold War, when the Cold War ended, then after the Russians were forced to withdraw from Afghanistan in the late 1980s, and now after the US pullout from Afghanistan following its longest unwon war. So the roller coaster nature of the relationship is well known, with ties lurching between close engagement and deep estrangement. And at times, this happened simultaneously, as for example, at various points after 9/11. So relations have swung in a cyclical pattern between highs and lows, interspersed with periods of benign disengagement. I think while I'm concerned with looking at the future of the relationship, the historical context is important because this really gives us a better sense of how we can consider the future. So when we look at the history of the relationship, we find that positive transformations in ties were always driven by events, geopolitical storms, or factors extraneous to bilateral ones. And this is illustrated by the three times that Pakistan became a frontline state and worked closely with the United States. In the first case, of course, as you all know, it was a function of the Cold War. In the second, a consequence of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. And in the third, a result of 9/11. And even at times of a close alliance, there was usually an elephant in the room. For example, it was India during the relationship's many phases. Now, the US priority during the Cold War was countering and defeating communism. But for Pakistan, ties with Washington were part of its external balancing strategy to address its security dilemma given the vast power asymmetry with India, with a hostile India. So this involved a search for extra regional support to mitigate this asymmetry. But it always left Pakistan disappointed with the stance that Washington took. So relations evolved for much of the time as a subset of the two countries' differing strategic or security concerns. And during the struggle against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, it was Pakistan's nuclear program that was the elephant in the room. And this divergence was to surface once the Soviets, Russians were defeated and US priorities changed. As you would all recall, wide-ranging sanctions were imposed on Pakistan on nuclear grounds in what Islamabad saw and construed as a coercive chapter in relations. And then when re-engagement took place years later, it became defined by its transactional character. Pakistan, however, sought, as it does now, to predicate relations with America on the country's intrinsic importance rather than as a function of a third country or to be viewed through a single unifocal prism. Pakistan's frequent complaint in this regard was that the US often saw Pakistan through the lens of immediate tactical issues or requirements, as it is doing now, rather than broadening the base of ties and placing them on a stable and consistent track. Now, in the post 9/11 phase, ties were principally a function of America's war in Afghanistan and came to lack much meaningful bilateral content, with the principal and perhaps the only commonality being Afghanistan. And in this period, Islamabad felt that the US lacked a Pakistan policy. It had an Afghanistan policy, but it did not really have a Pakistan policy and only dealt with Islamabad through Afghan lens. Nevertheless, I think it's important to acknowledge that when the two countries cooperated on a common goal, something that they could agree on, where there was a convergence, it worked to mutual benefit and yielded mutually beneficial outcomes. This is illustrated most recently by Al Qaeda's decimation in the region in the post 9/11 phase, but it is also testified by the joint struggle the two countries forged during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So, there have been periods where mutual interests, when they have kicked in, then both countries have benefited. Now, the present phase of relations can best be described as being in transition as a consequence of transformed regional and global dynamics, the advent of the Biden administration, as well as, of course, the American pull-out, withdrawal from Afghanistan. So the question is, what is this relationship transitioning to? Where is it really going? Now, the challenge of a reset in ties, which is what both countries are, I think, trying to do, is being faced in a vastly transformed international landscape, which is increasingly multipolar, but with the world passing through one of history's most unsettled periods. The global environment, in fact, is in a state of flux. The power balance has changed fundamentally, and a realignment of relationships is taking place at both the global and regional levels. And if we look around, the predominant trend among major powers is one of competition or confrontation rather than cooperation, which is having a destabilizing impact globally and fueling much unpredictability. The overarching or defining geopolitical reality today is the standoff between the US and China. America, and I know Zamir is going to deal with this, so I will only mention this in passing. America is embarked on a policy of containing China and pursuing a strategy of mobilizing countries to line up with it, to join it, to counter Beijing's rising global power. Now, given Islamabad's strategic relationship with Beijing, US-China tensions have a direct bearing on Pakistan. And much as Pakistan would like to avoid getting into the crosshairs of this confrontation, this will likely be a tough balancing act. Pakistan obviously cannot and will not be part of any contained adopts a zero-sum approach in this regard, because that would seriously constrain future ties between the two countries. Now, in the immediate future, ties between Pakistan and the US will be influenced by how the situation in Afghanistan plays out under a Taliban government. There is scope for cooperation, but in a very limited way and a narrow bandwidth. The principal and perhaps only US interest is to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't again become a base for terrorist groups. And its expectation is also that the Taliban will deliver on their pledge not to allow terrorist groups that still reside in Afghanistan from using Afghan territory to attack other countries. So the US wants Pakistan's help in this regard, both in the sense of using its leverage with Kabul to deliver on this, and also in extended cooperation in counterterrorism, CT. And this suggests that in the near term, this is what relations can probably be based on, as it was rather bluntly stated recently by the US Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, and Masuma also quoted from that when, she said, we're really not looking for broad-based relations, but we want to see cooperation in specific areas. Obviously, the specific area that they're most interested in, and perhaps only interested in, is counterterrorism. So if the opportunity for a reconfiguration of ties is rather limited, the risks for the relationship are even greater. Already, the mood on Capitol Hill is very negative about Pakistan on account of the widespread perception, mistaken in our view, that Islamabad's support for the Taliban over the years contributed to the US debacle there. The Biden administration itself, of course, hasn't said this. It has not explicitly stated this, but that view is prevalent in US policy circles. So this view and the tendency of many former military and other officials to scapegoat Pakistan has built up a somewhat toxic environment for the relationship. And an even bigger risk lies ahead. It is that the only repressive practices that marked their past period in power in the 1990s. And worse, if they are unable or unwilling to control the terrorist groups that reside there, including ISIS or Daesh. Thus, Afghanistan's future will influence, even shape, Pakistan-US relations in the near term. Another factor that will affect the relationship concerns the dynamics of the triangular US, Pakistan, India relationship. Islamabad, of course, recognizes that India has a pivotal role in Washington's Asia policy, and is in fact America's strategic choice or strategic priority. So it is not this growing relationship between Washington and Delhi per se that concerns Islamabad, which in any case is America's sovereign choice, but the security impact that their strategic cooperation may have on Pakistan. The augmentation of India's defense and strategic capabilities obviously has implications for Pakistan's security. And of course, the impact on the stance taken by the US on the Kashmir dispute, which is already one of silence on India's grave uh, human rights abuses, uh, that obviously rankers with Pakistan. And the fact that the US really took no position on India's illegal move to annex occupied Jammu and Kashmir into the Indian Union. So, I mean, this clearly, because the Kashmir dispute is very much alive and there, um, the US sort of lack of interest or not taking a position and not speaking out on human rights clearly has an impact on how Islamabad views the United States. And if a key element of America's strategy to counter China is to project India as a strategic counterweight to Beijing, this obviously also impacts on relations with Pakistan. And we have seen that in the past, US support for India has almost always emboldened Delhi and hardened its posture towards Pakistan, almost encouraging it to become more aggressive and belligerent towards our country. So closer US-India relations will therefore confront Pakistan with a regional environment of greater strategic imbalance. Now, as Masuma also summed up, and I will close with a few of my remarks about how Pakistan views its relationship with the US, clearly this is among Pakistan's most critical bilateral relationships. The US remains the single largest market for Pakistan's exports and an important source of foreign direct investment, although this has declined significantly over the years. But Pakistan also sees the US as pivotal for regional peace and stability. And as the relationship has in recent years pivoted around Afghanistan and lacked bilateral content, Pakistan wants to move beyond this single issue focus and have a broader relationship that is based on Pakistan's intrinsic importance, inherent importance. It wants more of an economic, trade, and investment dimension. And of course, there are important linkages that Pakistan wants to explore and can benefit from, especially in education and science and technology. And of course, Pakistan will continue to want to leverage our very enterprising diaspora in the United States. They have a critical role to play as a bridge between the two countries. They played this role in the past, and they will continue to have this role to play in the future. So, to my mind, the prospects for a major improvement in ties are rather limited, which is why I think lowering our expectations will probably be more prudent and realistic. And perhaps what will be most consequential for future relations. I mean, I know we're looking at foreign policy, but a strong foreign policy always rests on a strong domestic base. So, what I believe is that the most consequential factor for future relations will be Pakistan's domestic trajectory and how well it governs itself and whether it is able to empower itself by building a strong economy. I think its domestic repositioning will determine its ability to effectively conduct its foreign policy more generally, and of course, be seen as a serious and important player by Washington. So I'll close with that, and I look forward to hearing my co-panelists. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Ambassador Lodhi. This was a sweeping description, historical as well as contemporary, of the relationship between Pakistan and the United States. And you have identified many, many factors, the changed global situation, the importance of Afghanistan in our relationship with the United States. You have identified the China factor. And you have also, I think, very rightly pointed out that whatever our differences may have been, the United States continues to be a very important player regionally for us also, and of course globally. You have very rightly also pointed out the role which the diaspora, the Pakistani diaspora can play, and the dynamics of the triangular relationship between Pakistan, India, and the United States. We have changed the order of the presentation. The next speaker is Ambassador Zamir Akram, and rather naturally we will go from Dr. Lodhi's speech to that of Ambassador Zamir Akram. She mentioned China, and one of the important challenges with respect to our relations with the US is the China factor, on which Ambassador Zamir Akram will speak. It's a pleasure to introduce him. Ambassador Zamir Akram is one of the most distinguished members of Pakistan's foreign service, and he has served in many, many missions in the former Soviet Union, in India, in the United States. He has served twice, and at the United Nations twice. Afghanistan seems to be a major theme for us today. So he has dealt with key issues, including Afghanistan, nuclear non-proliferation, arms control and disarmament, UN reforms, human rights, and counterterrorism. In fact, he is an expert in disarmament. He has also dealt with other issues during his diplomatic career, refugees and humanitarian affairs, with trade and development, with intellectual property, labor and health. And he will speak on the China factor in US-Pakistan relations. Ambassador Zamir Akram.
Thank you, Dr. Masan, for inviting me to participate along with these very distinguished panel. And also thank you for your introduction. Now, Ambassador Lodhi has already spoken in detail about the US-Pakistan relationship, so I will try not to repeat some of those issues that she has covered, but I apologize in advance for any repetition which is bound to happen. I would put this question of the China factor in Pakistan-US relations to begin with in a strategic context. I think we need to recognize the underlying strategic realities that affect this triangular relationship. Since the emergence of the People's Republic of China, China has always been a key factor in Pakistan-US relations. As far as the US-Pakistan relationship is concerned, my view is that this relationship from the very beginning up to the present time has lacked a strategic anchor. Pakistan has not been important for the United States in and of itself, but rather as a means to the achievement of American objectives elsewhere. And so there has been an asymmetry in Pakistan-US relations throughout this time of our relations. And this asymmetry is described it should be described in my view as the pursuit of strategic objectives or strategic relations by Pakistan vis-a-vis the United States in order to ensure its security interests as well as its economic development. And so for that reason, for Pakistan, the US has always had a strategic importance. But for the United States, this relationship has been largely tactical for transient and traditional and transactional interest over time whenever the US has required Pakistan's assistance in that regard. So that is what I mean, that these relationships have always been asymmetrical, and they continue to be asymmetrical in the foreseeable future. By contrast, Pakistan-China relations are based on a strategic convergence. And that convergence, which started around about 1962, and I'll tell you why, but that convergence has been increasing, and today it's more important than ever in the past. So this is the different distinction that I would like to draw in terms of the strategic realities between in this triangular relationship. But this is not just a triangular relationship either. And as Dr. Lodhi pointed out, a very big player in this relationship is, of course, India. And from time to time, also the former Soviet Union and the present Russian Federation. And we also need to recognize, I think, going ahead particularly, that for the United States, throughout its history of relations with South Asia, the preference has always been for relations with India. And Pakistan has been the second best option, largely because of the Indian preference to pursue a so-called non-aligned policy in the beginning, at least up till the end of the Cold War. And after the end of the Cold War, of course, the India-US relationship has tremendously improved, as I will also talk about. So these strategic realities are very relevant to our discussion today. For the sake of some background vis-a-vis the Pakistan-China relationship, I think it's important to recall that, as I mentioned, the Pakistani partnership with the United States, a defense alliance for its own security needs, and the joining of SEATO and CENTO. But at the same time, Pakistan was among the first countries to recognize China and was perhaps the first Muslim country to recognize China in January 1950. And after that, we pursued what I would call a policy of confused duality between the United States and China. Because while we were progressing with our relations with China and engaging in defense cooperation with the United States, there were times when we engaged in sort of gratuitous criticism of the Chinese and even provided covert assistance to the United States against China, particularly in Tibet and Xinjiang. President Ayub's offer of a defense pact to India raised a pertinent question by Prime Minister Nehru as to defense against whom. And obviously the implication was because of the defense against China. So these were the kinds of measures or steps that we were taking that sent confusing signals to Beijing. Still, the Chinese showed great forbearance, in my view, towards Pakistan and took a long-term view of its relations with Pakistan. For instance, it eschewed criticism of Pakistan right from the beginning, even when we were a part of SEATO and CENTO. In fact, at the Afro-Asian Summit in 1955, Premier Zhou Enlai told Prime Minister Bogra that the Chinese understood Pakistan's compulsions for joining the US defense alliances, and also assured him that there is no conceivable clash of interests between Pakistan and China. The watershed, of course, in the relationship between Pakistan and China came about during the Indo-China 1962 war, when, as a result of Prime Minister Nehru's forward policy towards China in Ladakh and in the eastern region, the two countries went to war. And even though there was no military partnership or relationship between India and the United States, the US came out fully in support of the Indians and provided military assistance to them, while also exerting extreme pressure on Pakistan not to take advantage of this situation. The end result of this, of course, was the first major step in Pakistan-China relations, which was the conclusion of the Pakistan-China boundary agreement in March 1963, within less than a year of the India-China war. Then, again, another major step was the 1965 war, when the Chinese went out of their way to provoke and intimidate the Indians, whereas on the other side, we saw the US government pursuing a more, what they termed it as a more balanced approach towards India and Pakistan, which had a greater negative impact on Pakistan because of our reliance on American arms supplies. This marked the beginning of the Pakistan-China defense collaboration after 1965, and that increasingly has gone to greater heights since then. So during this period, of course, the Americans became increasingly concerned of our relationship with China, which prompted President Ayub at one point to tell President Johnson that his geopolitical situation required Pakistan to engage in a triangular tightrope walking exercise between the United States and China and Pakistan. Dramatically, the situation changed in the world after the American defeat in Vietnam, which led to a fundamental shift in American policy towards China and the opening up towards China and what the Americans called Nixon playing the China card against the Soviet Union in 1970. Now, in this process, as we all know, Pakistan played a key role to facilitate the meeting between the Chinese and the Americans, and as a result of which the Americans were obviously gratified for this assistance. But surprisingly, our leadership at that time did not really ask for anything in return. And it was, I would say, a wasted opportunity to have improved or brought about a fundamental change in Pakistan-US relations. But the Soviets, however, took a very dim view, obviously, of Pakistan's role. And I'd like to quote then Foreign Minister Gromyko as to what he said. And he said, "It is truly amazing that they, Pakistan, allow themselves to be used by others as tools in a conflict that can only damage their own national interests." And these were words that were followed up by the Soviet Union by concluding their treaty of friendship with India in later 1970, leading to the encouraging and enabling India to launch its offensive against Pakistan and the dismemberment of Pakistan in 1971. At that time, it must be recalled, and it is not well known, the Chinese were willing to help Pakistan militarily, as at that time Foreign Minister Bhutto had asked the Chinese for. But the Chinese said that they are willing to do this provided the Americans would give them a guarantee against Soviet use of nuclear weapons against China, which of course Dr. Kissinger conveyed that he was not in a position to do. And the rest, as they say, is history. The other big change was, of course, 1974, when India tested its first nuclear device. This led to discriminatory American sanctions against Pakistan, but very little, in fact, was done to deter India from pursuing its nuclear program. However, more importantly for Pakistan, it opened up the avenue for Pakistan-China nuclear cooperation. It also opened up the Chinese-American relationship, also opened up for China the opportunity for its four modernizations under Deng Xiaoping. And it can conceivably be argued that eventually it was really China that played the American card rather than the other way around. And so the Pakistan-China-US cooperation, in a sense, reached its highest point during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan from 79 to 89, when the three countries collaborated to defeat the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, which eventually led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that brings me to the present phase, which started around about 1990 with the end of the Cold War and the emergence of American unipolarity and pursuit of a zero-sum global policy to ensure that no competitor can emerge to challenge American global supremacy. And this is a policy that has been pursued since the first Bush presidency up to the present consistently. American pursuit of preemption, unilateralism, and containment led to growing divergence between the US and China, as well as between the US and Russia. On the other hand, it promoted a Chinese-Russian strategic partnership. Today, the American-China policy has moved from just mere containment to confrontation. The US has built up its own military presence by shifting almost 60% of its assets, its military assets, from Europe to Asia Pacific. It has strengthened its existing defense partnerships with Asian powers like Japan, Australia, South Korea, and it has built new strategic alliances, created new strategic alliances, including with countries like India and Vietnam. During the Obama period, there was the pivot to Asia. During the Trump administration, the US developed the quadrilateral alliance between the United States, Australia, Japan, and India. And now, most recently, the Biden administration has created AUKUS between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. So the purpose, of course, the ostensible purpose from the American argument is to ensure that there is a rules-based international order in the Asia Pacific and that freedom of navigation can be ensured. However, from the Chinese perspective, these efforts amount to a new Cold War, which can potentially deny China's maritime routes and challenge China's claims to territories, particularly in the South China and the East China Seas. Viewed from an overall perspective, of course, the American-China confrontation now has impacted on virtually every country in the region, as well as across the globe. The Chinese response, of course, has been to develop its Belt and Road Initiative, the Continental Maritime and Digital Global Connectivity New Silk Road, its CPEC flagship project in Pakistan. But it has always argued that China seeks a peaceful rise and win-win cooperation, and that it is not seeking a great power status to replace the United States. Asked about China's ambitions, about a great power role, the Chinese Foreign Office spokesman recently said the Chinese are not stupid. Now, what does this mean for Pakistan? I think first and foremost, we have a double-edged problem. The first problem is the Indo-US strategic partnership against China. As a result of this, the US largely ignored India's nuclear tests of 1998, while it pursued a policy of building up India against China through the Civilian Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, the NSG waiver for India, etc., as well as signing 4 foundational agreements with the Indians, which provide India with access to high-tech equipment from the United States in terms of defense and intelligence and space and even new warfare technologies where they are increasingly cooperating in cyberspace, outer space, artificial intelligence, and the whole range of these kind of technologies that the Americans are now sharing with it. So the buildup of India's defense capabilities has obviously encouraged creates a problem for Pakistan, as was stated by General Kiani way back, that Pakistan has to deal with Indian capabilities and not intentions. So whatever Indian intentions, we have to deal with their capabilities, which have been increased tremendously. But even as far as intentions are concerned, I think the American support for India's ambitions as a regional or global power has encouraged India's aggressive behavior. And we saw that kind of aggressive behavior by the Modi government resorting to operations in Pathankot after the Pathankot incident or after the Uri incident in Balakot. And then it has not been limited just to the confrontation between India and Pakistan, but also confrontation between India and China. The revocation of Article 370 in Kashmir and the incorporation of Ladakh in particular incensed the Chinese, because the agreement between these two countries was that the ground realities would not be changed. But the Indians went ahead and did that anyway, which has led to that confrontation that has now been taking place in the Galwan Valley between India and China. So this is the kind of impact that this has had. Directly vis-a-vis China, I think the US has also engaged in acts of what the Chinese see as intense provocation. They have, for instance, removed the ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, a terrorist organization operational in Afghanistan, from its list of terrorists. And the Chinese see that as a provocative move because ETIM is engaged in promoting terrorism in Xinjiang, province of China. And the Americans have also brought about attacks on China's internal situation, internal conditions, such as the situation in Xinjiang itself, where they have been accused of genocide in Hong Kong, in Tibet, and more recently, as we are reading in the newspapers now, over Taiwan. Now, these are China's red lines. Although they talk about a peaceful rise and win-win cooperation, but on these issues, which are China's internal issues, there is no room for compromise as far as the Chinese are concerned. So we are facing a tremendous, difficult choice now between the two major powers which are facing off in our region. But if we were to talk about a choice, and I think a lot of people in Pakistan are talking about the fact that Pakistan should not put all its eggs in the Chinese basket, my argument has been that there is no other basket. I think we would be deluding ourselves to believe that there is an opening or an opportunity with the United States that can match the strategic gains that we have obtained from the Chinese and can obtain from the Chinese in the future. And these need to be underscored because a lot of us forget of what has actually been achieved through this strategic partnership. So let me list these out a bit. Pakistan Ordnance Factories, Taxila Heavy Mechanical Complex, the Karakoram Highway, Civilian Nuclear Cooperation, Chashma 1, 2, 3, 4, Karachi or K2 and K3, those 1,000 megawatt reactors, the Grandfather Clause for Unlimited Nuclear Cooperation, the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation of 2005, the Free Trade Agreement between China and Pakistan, space cooperation, a lot of which is not known, but it's there and it's very much important for us to place our satellites in space. Joint production of the JF-17 aircraft, CPEC, the Gwadar port. So all of these are tremendous benefits that we have gained from the Chinese. And now in the present Afghan scenario, the possibilities of Pakistan and China working closely with Afghanistan and perhaps also with Iran have increased tremendously for regional connectivity through Afghanistan and through Pakistan, which China is very keen to develop. But of course, these will not be without risk. And the risk is there in terms of what we are seeing as an acceleration of Indian-sponsored terrorism in Pakistan. We are seeing this recently, in which the Chinese are especially being targeted. And there's also a US pressure on Pakistan talking about the Chinese debt trap, which is really a myth. And also talking about the fact that that for Pakistan, it is far more important to rely on Western assistance through IMF, World Bank, and to be a part of the FATF rather than falling into this Chinese debt trap. So these are the kind of pressures that are being leveled on us. Now, and Ambassador Lodhi has already spoken about what Wendy Sherman had to say to us. So that really is a very clear marker of what the US wants from us, and that is basically counterterrorism cooperation in Afghanistan. But here we have to be careful of what kind of cooperation, because there is still talk in the US about at least, if not acquiring bases, but at least acquiring air passage through Pakistani airspace to conduct operations in Afghanistan, which the Taliban have opposed. And it could be a risky thing to do. And I for one, would be very careful in what kind of cooperation we engage with the Europeans in this context. It does not have to be such a negative outcome. Even though Mr. Biden has described described China as the greatest geopolitical threat of the 21st century, but on the ground, all Americans know that there is a massive amount of interdependence between the United States and China. For instance, there is over $500 billion worth of annual bilateral trade. There is US investments in China are over $124 billion. Chinese holding of American assets is something like $1 trillion. Then there are issues like climate change and COVID. So they don't need to be, there is obviously room for the US and China to cooperate as well. And then there is also terrorism. If we look at it, terrorism emanating from Afghanistan is a threat to everyone. And so that can also be an area of cooperation, not just between the Pakistan, US, China, but also involving the Taliban themselves. But I end on this rather somber note, because I would like to recall what one of my former senior colleagues who has dealt with China for a long time once said, and it's famously known among our colleagues about Pakistan-China relations. And he said that Pakistanis love China for what it can do for them, while the Chinese love Pakistanis despite what they do to themselves. So I think we need not disappoint the Chinese. At least we need not disappoint ourselves in how we deal with China. Thank you very much. for your
Very much,
opportunity.
Ambassador. Thank you very much, Ambassador Zamir Akram. Ambassador Zamir Akram has placed the China factor with respect to Pakistan in its strategic context, and he has raised many, many issues in our relationship with China. What I take from his talk is the restraint, I think, which China has shown in its relationship with the other countries of the world, whose relationship with us also impinge upon our future. He has said that people say you should not put all your eggs in one basket, but apparently there are no other baskets to put our eggs in. And he has also delineated the Indian factor in our relationship with China. Also, American policy post 1990, which shifted from containment of China to confrontation, and which has impacted every country in the region. I might add that Ambassador Zamir Akram was Pakistan's permanent representative in Geneva for many years. The next speaker is Dr. Adin Najam. And Dr. Adil Najam is the inaugural dean of the Frederick S. Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University in the United States. He is also a professor of international relations and of earth and environment. He's known for his work on climate change. He has a very strong relationship with academia in Pakistan. He has served as Vice Chancellor of the Lahore University of Management Sciences in Lahore. He has served in many other distinguished lectured in many other distinguished institutions in the United States. And in 2019, he was also appointed to the Prime Minister of Pakistan's Advisory Council on Foreign Affairs. Dr. Adin Najam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you very much. I hope people can hear me. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's an honor, actually, always to speak at the Pakistan Institute for International Affairs. I wish we were in your beautiful building, which I think is really a remarkable thing, and I hope to be there again soon. But more than that, it's also an honor to be with my co-panelists, both of whom I have tremendous respect for, one of whom was not only my boss, but literally my ustad. So I speak with a lot of pressure on me for all of those reasons. I'm going to show a few slides. Let me share my screen. I hope people can see the slides. If not, if someone can please let me know. But you should see a big white screen in there. Which is if you just give me 1 second, which is what will tell you that you have those. I'm going to make a few points, and I do these with great care, saying what I had just said about the folks who are here and the wonderful audience that is also there, which is already asking questions that I'm interested in hearing answers from my colleagues on. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to be, I should say that I'm glad I'm speaking after Dr. Lodhi and Ambassador Akram, because I'm going to build on some of those things. They may not agree with what I say, but their wisdom is important to what I am going to try to say. Let me also say that, as was mentioned, I've come from an academic point of view, especially today. On international affairs, we very often talk in the moment, and we should. And especially this moment is difficult. But for that reason, we also, I think, benefit from being conceptual, even theoretical sometimes. And I am going to take the boring job of trying to be that in the next few minutes. I want to make an argument, a slightly provocative argument. If you've seen my title, you've seen the argument already, which is the illogic of US-Pakistan relations. But if we come to that conclusion, if we do, we should come to it through some process, and that's what I want to take you through. And we should then also figure out what next steps are. And that's my goal. So I want to raise three questions. I'm not sure I will answer them, but I want to raise three questions that build on what both the previous speakers have said, and build on my title, if you will. The first of those questions is, what is the logic of US-Pakistan relations? Countries need to have relations. Smaller countries need to have relations with large countries. But what is the logic? There's always a logic behind it. And when I ask it, I'm not asking it in being facetious at all. It is important for Pakistan and the US separately to define what the logic of that relationship is. Why do we want that relationship? Before we come to what we want out of it, or how to fix it, or how to improve it, there should be some conversation on what the logic is. I'm not suggesting there's never been a conversation. In fact, this has been already a conversation on that. But this question needs to be posed much more directly. What is the logic of this relationship from each party's side? Because that will define the steps they will take. Otherwise, we are simply sort of moving through inertia, repeating routines that may have made sense at another point, may not make that now. So that's question one. Question two is an even more difficult question. And this is, what would a normal relationship between Pakistan and the US look like? Now, Dr. Lodhi is far too diplomatic and much too kind, and therefore she suggested there have been ups and downs. I, at least in the much less sort of time period I've focused on this, wonder when the ups were. And wonder also whether the downs have been that down, but what defines an up in a normal relationship if there was one? And one way to do that is, let's take some other country in US and say, which relationship does R look most similar to? Is it like the US-China relationship? No. Is it like the US-India relationship? Is it like the US-Nigeria relationship or US-Nepal relationship? But in that spectrum of any set of relationships, what would to us look like a normal relationship? Because if we do that, then we might want to say, okay, that is what we are working towards. By the way, I'm speaking today very clearly to a Pakistani audience. Therefore, I'm making this point this way. I have done similar conversations with my US colleagues, and they need to decide the same too. What would a normal relationship look like? And the third question that I raise is, what can one country, in this case Pakistan, because I'm speaking to a Pakistani audience, what can one of these countries do unilaterally to move to normal? And unilaterally is important but very difficult, because we are starting from the premise that that situation is not good. Therefore, are there unilateral moves that one of these countries can make, or each of these countries can make, that are not dependent on pehle tum karo phir main aaya, right? Because that logic is fine for Twitter. That logic is fine for a television show. But that logic is not a logic of actual diplomacy if you want to reach certain goals. So those are three questions. As I said, big questions, important questions, may not be able to answer them, but I hope we can have a conversation as we go. I want to do this essentially by telling you a story. I tell the story in great innocence, in goodwill, and with deep humility. I say innocence because I'm trying to step back from both the US and the Pakistan perspective and try to look as a student at this. In goodwill, because I might say things that might offend a few people. I hope not too much. And humility because of the present company, which is important. So let me come to the logic or illogic with these 5 first points of what words we use very often. So often that we know them and they're all true. At this point, and for as long as I can remember, even including those good times, when we were, and we often define good times as if we were getting large amounts of aid, or if the US was getting cooperation, as if that is what a normal relationship is or a good time is. Let us assume it is. But even in those, this is a relationship that is defined, especially today, by deep, visceral distrust. Not mistrust, but distrust. Pakistani sensibilities are very, very attuned to this when we listen to what we listen to from the US. But frankly, it is reciprocal and equal. Often one is asked, what do Pakistanis think of America, since I'm sitting here? And my usual response for the last at least 20, 30 years has been, they think of the United States exactly what the United States thinks of Pakistan. Exactly the same, at the street level, at the think tank level, at the government level, at every level. It is amazingly symmetrical. Pakistanis, there is not a Pakistani who trusts the US, and there is not a US person I know who trusts Pakistan. There is a sense that we need the other. You can choose whichever we and whichever other you want to put in that statement. There is a sense that the other is not just not to be trusted, but not really to be always believed. There is a sense that the other is arrogant. There is a sense that the other is only interested in you, and you can choose whichever you and other, as when and only when they need something to be achieved. Now, I know I'm beginning with a tough point, and I realize that. In Pakistan, I think when I talk at least sort of, to my Twitter friends, the sense is that we are hurt because the US somehow has all these qualities. The fact you go around the US is you will find exactly the same characterization of Pakistan. Now, we can debate who is right and who is wrong, but that is a separate point from the fact that the perception is thus. And therefore, the foreign policy and diplomatic challenge is to struggle with that perception, and within that to either change it or break it or to deal with it. I've probably said too much, and I suspect that I'm going to be called to task, but let me move on for time reasons. The word we often use, recently become very, 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 very popular, is the relationship is transactional. Of course it is. But I think we mean something else. All foreign policy is transactional. Right? All foreign policy should be transactional. US and UK is transactional in some level. US, France, as we've recently seen after the Australia deal, is certainly transactional. That was literally transactional. So what do we really mean when we say transactional? I think when we talk, and by we again, I mean both countries. Transactional, we mean something different. We are not talking about the transaction that is in all diplomacy, which is I have my interests, you have your interests, we come together, we figure out where the mutual interests are or where our common interests can be achieved, right? That's the usual transaction. But that's not the transaction which is being talked about when we are talking about US-Pakistan relations being transactional. US-Pakistan relations are being seen as transactional because there is a sense that this is like a transaction with a shopkeeper you don't even like. And I'm not going to go into sort of the ugly part of some of the examples one could give, but this is a transaction that you would rather not be having either case, but the benefit of that at some point, either because of geopolitics, the Soviets have just come into Afghanistan, or because of domestic. My own standing in my own country, mostly in Pakistan, can be improved, either because of the political backing, or because of the military backing, or because of the economic backing of the big power in the game. And that's my only interest in being with this player, rather than having any other actually mutual interest. And therefore, I am willing to make a transaction. Again, I apologize for being blunt here, but in either case, there is this very clear sense, and all that people have written about it from either side seem to suggest that the logic seems to be a transaction. And therefore, every move has to be transactional. Therefore, it should not be a surprise if after the US has left Afghanistan, they do not have an interest in Pakistan. If this was transactional in that sense, then what else would you expect? Why would you expect anything else? I do not have a relationship with my corner store storekeeper after I have bought the bar of soap and use the bar of soap. That's done. When I need another bar of soap, I will come. Now, again, we seem to sometimes argue as if this is just a US behavior, but from the US point of view, the Pakistan behavior might seem the same. We might want to make a better case if it is not. But that, I think, is what we mean when we say transactional. If I have not already lost you, allow me just two or three more. Normal. What does a normal relationship mean between the two countries? And I put that picture because in Pakistan, very often, that is seen as sort of this high point of US-Pakistan relations. Lyndon Johnson is not very comfortable in that picture. He's tolerating Miss General Youth because he needed something. Yes, they went along and sort of, they both had sort of a macho relationship given their personalities and so on and so forth. But at some point, I think this question of, and I've already said something about it, so I won't go, but what would a normal, long-term, non-crisis prone, non-moment in geostrategy relationship look like? What would be a relationship between these two countries at times when they aren't in a crisis that we would say would be normal between the two? And in some ways, I think, and I'm really going to get into trouble, I think a Pakistani belief of our own geographic importance has been so overblown that it has become a liability. I actually wish we were a small island state in the South Pacific. But in some ways, this idea that we are so geostrategically important, which we are, I'm not suggesting it's not so, but that has become a liability because in our own eyes, as well as the eyes of the world, that relationship is therefore prone only to be seen in the perspective of crises. And therefore, at any given point, we have to sort of develop a relationship by whatever the prevailing most important geostrategic game is, rather than, for example, I'll give you an example. One of the countries that was mentioned was Vietnam, right? And the US defeat in Vietnam and so on and so forth. Imagine the US-Vietnam relationship today and compare it to the US-Pakistan relationship. And that's an amazing study. That's a country the US actually went to war with, went out in disgrace. Imagine the fact that the average American today will probably have more trust for, in just a sentence, for someone from Afghanistan, where they've been fighting a war, than from Pakistan, who's supposed to be an ally. And yes, this is, the US has not acted as an ally, right? But from the US perspective, nor has Pakistan. And I'll come to that in a minute. So I think this idea of what a normal relationship would mean, usually normal relationships have a lot of geostrategy in them, but they have some element of economic benefit. They have some element of political, ideological commonality, right? That was in the Cold War. You believe in democracy, so on and so forth. They have some element of cultural commonality. And this is why this idea of soft diplomacy, and I tip my hat once again to Dr. Maleeha Lodhi, because in her last tenure at the UN, and particularly, sort of, you have to do soft diplomacy in a hard way. It is a serious business. It is not a distraction from the real stuff. It is the real stuff. And part of that real stuff is defining what normal relationships, not just with the US, but with any country, look like. I'm rushing through, and I know I'm making sort of big points without going into them because I don't have time, but I at least wanted to throw the headlines. Then there is, of course, the question of interest, which is central to all foreign policy. And here is something I have toyed with, and I'm still struggling with it. In a way, I have recently argued that the Pakistan-US relationship is not a relationship. It's a non-relationship. And the day I will be convinced it is a relationship is when anyone from either country, especially the two people from the two countries talking together, can talk for 10 minutes seriously, without bringing a third country in. Can any US and Pakistan conversation go for 10 minutes without alluding to a third country? Now, whether that is Afghanistan and the Taliban, whether that is India, whether that is China, whether that is Iran. Now, I'm not suggesting that relationships are not about third countries. Of course they are. That's what foreign policy and diplomacy is. But at least for 10 minutes, we should be able to carve out a conversation that is about US Pakistan, even if not common, let's say uncommon. And that is right now a very difficult thing to do. That is why the distrust is. I do not really know, I hope I don't abuse anyone by saying so, I do not know a single Pakistan expert in the US. They're experts in India who also study Pakistan because Pakistan becomes the third party. There are lots of people interested in China who study Pakistan because of that reason. There are lots of people interested in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. And therefore, Pakistan comes up. This, I think, is a failure of what I do as an academic in the US, but it is also a very serious thing. I'm often invited to meetings on talking about business or climate, and everyone nods for 3 minutes because they wish that was a good thing to talk about. But immediately we come back to the security thing, and that is, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying all focus on just that is not a healthy, normal relationship. Now, I put this picture because it is the picture of the moment. And this very unfair, but totally expected response from the US of conflating the Taliban with Pakistan. In fact, trying to conflate the Taliban with Pakistan, trying to see Pakistan as a Taliban spokesperson. Pakistan doesn't help the cause sometimes by sounding like that either. But this is a very clear scapegoating, if you will. But it is not simply that the US would do that. You can see the logic of why they do that. And you can also see the logic of what we do. But it is a defeating logic in both cases. It is as absurd for Pakistan at this point to think, and I don't think the government does, but certainly at the popular discourse, that US-Pakistan relations have anything at all to do now with US-India relations. US-India relations, as Zamir Saab has already pointed out, have a totally different logic for the US and have had it for a very long time. There is nothing that you can do or should try to do to change that, because you can't. Right. And I think sort of at least at the official level, that is pretty clear now, but at the popular level, there is still some scene. Final and last points on this, and I hope you woke me up really early this morning, Dr. Masuma, so maybe that's why I'm going on this little tirade here. But the final point on this one is the word strategic. And I think strategic is always a very important point, but let us also question the logic of the strategicness of the relationships. There was a strategic logic when the relationships first started. It was the logic of the Cold War. And in some ways, I think we need to, the whole world needs to, but in this case, Pakistan needs to rethink also what strategic means today. What strategic and geostrategic means today. In some ways, certainly the US is prisoner still to a Cold War logic of a bipolar world. And you're seeing that in the US response to China, because that's the framework people have grown up with. So strategic seems, okay, there is either one or two powers. If there are two powers, they fight and everyone else chooses a side. Yesterday, Mr. Blinken, the Secretary of State, was in Latin America, in South America, and it really reminded you of the very similar sort of Cold War logic of spheres of influence. And in some ways, the US, one can understand, is prisoner to that. But we have, the Cold War has been not there for a very long time now. And in some ways, we need to get out of both the logic of the bipolar world and then the supposed unipolar world for a little while to figure out whatever the new thing is. And let me be a little bold, as if I haven't been. The US seems to be nudging countries to choose sides. China is not. I don't think Pakistan's importance to China will increase if Pakistan is seen as not being in the US camp. That has not been China's position before. No, it is not China's position elsewhere in the world. There is a new strategic logic developing, which I don't know what it is, because everyone's trying to figure out what it is, but it is not the logic of a bipolar superpower rivalry similar to the Cold War, which is why the agreement here, the announcement yesterday from Mr. Blinken seemed like we'll have a BRI of our own. Now, in that, maybe countries will benefit and the two big powers will throw around money. Someone will do CPEC and the US will do its own economic and other countries will reap the benefit. But the point is that strategic does not, should not, cannot mean simply going back to a Cold War logic. There are two powers, I have to choose a side. Nor to the Chaudhary argument of a unipolar world, there is one power, and if you aren't with the Chaudhary Sahab, then you are nowhere. And that I think is a strategic point. Let me end. I know I've thrown a lot and I apologize for it being cryptic. All my points can be broken and probably may even be wrong, but I only wanted to put the headlines. I hope we'll have a discussion. Ab kya karna? What do we do? As the Faiz Saab Nazam from Faiz Ahmed Faiz sort of says, ab tum hi kaho kya karna hai? Ab kaise paar utarna hai? So let me give you 5 suggestions. I'll make them in Urdu because I'm talking to a Pakistani audience.
Adil, zara jaldi se kijiyega.
I'll finish.
We are running out of time.
First, last slide. First, we have to be what I call nive hole hole, meaning that this is a long game. We have to be at it slow. We don't have to decide a side today. Let history play out. Second, chaske nahi lena, and what I mean by that is really serious. This visceral, especially in recent years, this sort of glee at the US retreat or defeat that you see on television anchors and so on and so forth, it adds to the distrust. This is not a Pakistan-US rivalry. There is no logic to that. There is no need to that. Third, sabse pehle Pakistani, and what that means is that what Dr. Lodhi also said, the domestic politics is important. Your economy is important. What will give you strategic depth is a good economy and good, stable politics inside the country. Sawal dosti ka nahi, safaradkari ka hai. What I mean by that, you are not choosing friends. We have to create a diplomacy. You should expect pressure in FATF. The question in FATF is not why the US is not supporting you or India is not supporting you. The question is, why have we not gotten the support of all the other countries? And finally, difficult questions. Mushkil faisle kabhi aasan nahi hote. Difficult questions are difficult because there are no easy answers. And when you are weak, then you will get the pressure from IMF. And therefore, if you are going to, you have to fasten your seatbelt because difficult solutions are going to be required. My apologies for going too long. My thanks for bearing with me, and my apologies for being too blunt. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adil Najam. Thank you very much. He has put forward a conceptual presentation, and the topic of his talk was the illogic of US-Pakistan relations. He has pointed out, first he raised these 3 questions, very provocative questions. He has emphasized that there is no trust between the two countries at any level, not in the street, not in the government. He has also raised a very interesting question. Non-relationship. Can the two countries or people from two countries talk for 10 minutes without alluding to a third country? As you know, in this webinar, we have alluded to many other countries. And then he has asked, what is the logic of a strategic relationship today? What does it mean today? Do we have to go back to the logic of the Cold War? I will now open the floor to questions. There are many, many questions, and I don't know if we can do justice to all of them. The first question is for Ambassador Lodhi, and this is from the Karachi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. It is about the Reconstruction Opportunity Zones, ROZ, at Torkham and Chaman borders with Afghanistan, as well as the earthquake-affected areas of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, for which there was a lot of support in Congress. And it was floated during President George Bush's visit in 2006. The question is, what in your opinion is the fate of the ROZ bill? I don't know if Dr. Lodhi knows about the bill, but this was a bill, this was a bill that aimed at setting up the reconstruction opportunity zones at Torkham and Chaman. Can you unmute yourself?
Masuma, let's take one or two questions together. Otherwise, we will not give people a chance. Let's take a bunch of questions and then we can try to address them quickly. Because we have literally 10 minutes now.
We can take a few minutes more. Okay,
Very
here's another
few minutes more because I have another commitment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take your questions first. There is this question about why is it that relations between the United States and Pakistan have often grown closer during periods of military rule? And then there's a question about the Prime Minister's statement of absolutely not policy. And there is a question about should we offer an air corridor to the United States through Pakistan?
Okay, let me first say this absolutely not was to it's a non-issue. The Prime Minister said absolutely not to a question that some interviewer asked about bases, but the United States never asked Pakistan for bases. That has been acknowledged and confirmed by both Pakistani officials and American officials. What they seek is what they already have, but they seek it in a much more specific way, which is ALOCs, which is the air lines of communication. This was something that was made available to the United States after 9/11, when Pakistan joined the United States in cooperation. And as far as I know, this arrangement never really relapsed or collapsed. It was never abrogated. There was nothing formal in it. And what Pakistan is seeking now, as far as I know, and these talks are ongoing, is a formal way in which this can be somehow, where Pakistan's interests can be protected while cooperating in counterterrorism. But, I'm not the right person to address it. I think you have to ask somebody in the government what they propose to do in terms of what the US wants. My point was in my presentation that I don't see any commonality between the two countries right now, other than counterterrorism. That is a US requirement. But Pakistan is also keen, according to my information, because there is the danger of Afghanistan once again becoming, at least some parts of Afghanistan, being used to attack other countries, including Pakistan. We have a huge challenge with the TTP. I, for one, totally disagree with any negotiations with terrorists who have blood on their hands of children who were killed and, in cold blood. So I think, counterterrorism is an area that is going to be very difficult for the two countries. But at the same time, it's the only game in town in terms of the relationship right now. That's why my argument is that we should have reduced, lowered expectations of the relationship. But you can't wish the relationship away because the United States remains an important global player. It remains an important player in our region as well as globally. So I think those people who argue that we should have no relationship with the United States, I think it's, frankly, I don't see that as a serious position. So I do think that we have to be very careful in how we, how we, as Zamir also said, what do we want to do in terms of how we want the future of the relationship. What was the other question? Something in the past, I think, that there was some offer from George Bush, but that's as I said.
There was an offer if
But
President,
it never really materialized. But I do want to, very quickly, because I know we won't not going to have much time. I think what we must recognize is that countries move according to their interests. And when we say there were highs and lows, yes, there have been highs and there have been lows. The lows were, and I was there at that time, when Pakistan was under multiple sanctions. I think that was the lowest point. I don't think that low is reached right now because Pakistan is under no sanctions by the United States. When I arrived for my second stint in Washington, we were under 4 layers of sanctions: democracy, missile, nuclear, and I can't remember, I think there was a fourth layer, 4 layers. That's a low, if I can call it. The highest, I think the Prime Ministership of Benazir Bhutto in her second term, I happened to be there at that time too. That was a high because the relationship she was able to forge with President Clinton meant the removal of these sanctions and the inauguration of a new era in the relationship. Now, everything is not perfect. Two countries don't have identical interests. The challenge for practitioners like me and Zamir Akram is to see how we can further our country's interests and align those with another country, whether it's the United States or it's China or it's, the United Kingdom. How can we further our country's advance our country's interests by aligning it with what that other country's interests may be? Sometimes the relationship is a tactical one, but there is nothing wrong with the relationship. That's the way it is. You're still furthering your country's interest through a tactical relationship. And many relationships are tactical. Sometimes the relationship becomes strategic. Sometimes the public doesn't approve of the relationship, and yet the elite wants to have that relationship because certain elite interests are served. So I think, Masuma would know this. She's, spent so many years studying this. The dynamics are very complex. They cannot be reduced to 3 or 4 questions. The dynamics in relationships between states are extremely complex. I, for one, have always felt that we need not to obsess about our relationship with any country. I, for one, have advocated that we should not predicate our relationship on only one country, because a country has greater leverage and respect if it is able to demonstrate that it has multiple relationships. I think that's the key for Pakistan. So, even these webinars, they're either about America or they're about China. But the world there is multipolar. The markets there are not just China and the United States. The markets are Africa, they're Latin America, they're Southeast Asia. So I think what Pakistan needs, and I do really want to say this because I know you have a very good audience, solid audience. There's a whole world out there. And in a multipolar world, we need to understand that we can't just have relationships with 2 countries. So it's either the United States or China. By all means, have them with these 2 countries. And I think the China relationship, as Zamir underlined, is critical for Pakistan. And I, for one, have been a friend of China for a very long time. But that doesn't mean that's all we do. Because I sometimes fear that is all we do. We need to see what the world looks like. We need to see, and we talk a lot about geoeconomics, for example. I think we can't talk about geoeconomics if we don't have economic relationships and trade relationships with other countries. So I would simply say that yes, the relationship with the US will remain important in the years to come. But obviously, Pakistan has made a strategic choice, and its strategic choice is China. Now, we will have to somehow balance our relationship with China with that of the United States. And I think we need, Adil said, what is a normal relationship? I'm very clear what a normal relationship is. A normal relationship is a stable relationship, and it's a predictable relationship. It can be at different planes. It can be a very rich relationship, or it can be a very narrow relationship. But normal is normal. Normal is what interpersonal relationships are also normal. What is not normal about a relationship is constant, what Adil rightly said, is mistrust, which is the same in an interpersonal relationship. How can an interpersonal relationship survive on the back of mistrust? So normal means stable, and it also means predictable. So that if there is a crisis, let's say beyond the 2 countries, You know how the other country is going to respond, and they know how you're going to respond. So that gives a degree of predictability in a relationship. So let me end there because I may not get a chance to speak again. Thank you.
Will you answer what she's left? Okay, we'll take the other questions to the other two panelists. Can you answer one more question, Maleeha?
Sure.
Can you answer one more question?
Certainly, Masuma. Certainly.
You have to leave, but there are so many questions for you. There's one questioner who wants to know why Pakistan and the United States have always grown closer together during periods of military rule.
I mean, I think that's coincidental with the point I made. I mean, it really plays to a point that I made earlier, which is that it has been usually geopolitical storms, especially in our region, but not just in our region, that have led to positive transformations in the relationship. And it just so happened that the military was in power. During the Cold War, much of the Cold War was spent under Ayub Khan's rule, 10 years. Then we had the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, which led again to Pak-US relations being, let's say strengthened, was General Ziaul-Haq's period in power. And thirdly, it was President Musharraf, when the third, let's say, geopolitical storm. So, as the other colleagues have also agreed with me, I mean, it's a basic fact that the relationship has been predicated on factors extraneous to bilateral ones. They've not been predicated for any period of time, except for very short periods, perhaps, very short, on Pakistan's intrinsic importance. So the key for us is also to look within. We spend too much time externalizing our problems. The United States didn't let FATF happen. The United States is not letting IMF happen. Why don't we meet IMF requirements and then see what happens? But we haven't met them. And why do we need the IMF anyway? If you want to get rid of American influence and IMF influence, make sure that you don't spend as much. You don't overspend from what you earn. You need to tax your people. You need the rich fat cats to be taxed. Same goes for FATF. What is the one sticking point? It is the prosecution of terrorists on the UN's sanctions list. So if you do that, if our country does that, and then we are not taken off the list, I would say there's something strange going on. But I think we need to also not externalize. What externalizing our problems does is to take away from the need for us to empower ourselves domestically and to stand on our own feet. This, to me, it's a cop-out. It's a flight from reality. It's constantly, blaming somebody else. I mean, we are, always complaining that we're being scapegoated. Yes, we are scapegoated from time to time, but why obsess about it? But let's not forget that we scapegoat a lot ourselves. Something that goes wrong is somebody else's fault. Why is it somebody else's fault? And if it is, what are we doing to counter it? I mean, I get tired, Masuma, of just listening to what goes by the name of foreign policy these days in our country, where all we're doing is complaining. We have to stop whining. Whining does not constitute foreign policy, and nor does it speak to a confident nation that has enough sort of confidence in itself to stand up for itself. I mean, constant complaining tone, and we think that's foreign policy. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There are some questions which I will refer to Zamir Akram, and they are about China. What is the role of the Quad in containing China? And how can it affect Pakistan-US relations?
Well, as I said, the ostensible declaratory purpose of the Quad is to ensure a rules-based order in the Asia-Pacific region, and to ensure freedom of navigation and settlement of disputes according to international law. That is the stated declaratory purpose. But what really masks the intentions or the real intentions is that let's look at the maritime. If we know that 80% of China's trade uses the maritime zone, the maritime links in the Asia Pacific region. And if the Quad, which involves, as you know, these four countries with and their navies, if the Quad can choke Chinese shipping, say at the Strait of Malacca or Hormuz or some other place, that would definitely or affect the Chinese shipping through this region. So the Chinese are obviously very concerned about that, number one. Number two, these are all major powers, and the combined strength of these Quad countries is supposedly or meant to counterbalance the growing Chinese military capabilities, especially in the Asia Pacific region. So that is the second factor. And the third factor is, of course, that the Quad is built or projected as a alliance of democracies. And so these democracies can then arrogate the right for themselves to criticize and castigate the Chinese for alleged human rights violations, which they are already doing. And the fifth is that where there is a clash between China and any member of the Quad, then potentially the other members of the Quad can come to that members of the Quad can come to the other countries' assistance, as is the case in, for instance, the China-India clash in the Ladakh region. And the US and others have fully supported the Indians on that issue. So I think this is really what the Quad, that is why the Chinese see the Quad as a threat to their security.
There's a question with.
How does that, okay.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Well, the question was, how can that affect Pakistan, China? As I mentioned in my talk very briefly, that because of the Quad relationship between the US and India, the US has built up Indian military capabilities in diverse fields and projected India's ability to operate in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, etc. So this obviously creates a security challenge for Pakistan with the growth of India's military capabilities.
Adil, would you like to answer the next question? Adil?
Ji, zarur.
Ji,
Certainly.
this has mixed issues. As we know, FATF and IMF are political weapons being used against Pakistan. This questioner says they are being used by the United States. Will Pakistan survive its current economic situation? And then he or she goes on to ask, what will be the future of Pakistan's nuclear assets?
Those are big questions. The IMF, FATF may or may not be political weapons, but they can be weaponized by major countries, just like any international institution can. The question then is, why are they sometimes weaponized, if you will, against certain countries, including, in this case, Pakistan, and why not? In the FATF case, I think the case is very clear that Pakistan is being unfairly treated, in my mind. And that is one way of putting pressure. However, I think what Dr. Lodhi said is exactly right. Why? My question, the whole thing, what can we do? Why are we in a situation where that pressure can be put? So that is not to say that the weaponization is not there, if you want to use that word. What there is to say is, when you are weak, when your own economic situation is weak, then you will be victimized, if you will. You will be targeted. If on the second question, which I do think I have a view on, can Pakistan come out of the economic crisis? Yes, it can. But if it does, it will have to do it on its own. It is neither in the crisis just because the whole world hates us, nor will it come out of the crisis just because the whole world sort of throws money at us. So I go back, I think Dr. Lodhi is exactly right. My point is exactly this. We have to sort of, foreign policy starts with me, right? Foreign policy starts with domestic strength. Other countries want to be friends with countries that can do something for them. Right? The question on FATF in my mind, again, I'll repeat, is also not just why certain countries, let's say US, okay, we buy that argument. I actually do think the argument is the US is putting pressure. That is pretty clear. The Indians are putting pressure. That is pretty clear. Neither of them is surprising. The question is, why are the other countries in FATF not standing with Pakistan or supporting? That is a question for diplomacy. And that is a question for what Dr. Lodhi again said. International affairs is not about one or two countries that are the big countries and you just focus on them. There is 195, or depending on how you count, 204 countries out there. There are relations between them. And this is that, I think, not necessarily still valid logic of the Cold War, which was structured around spheres of influence and made this much more simpler because you just color-coded the world map by certain countries. That is no longer true. That is the challenge the US is also facing. And that is the challenge that I think we also need to confront. On the nuclear assets, I hope they are safe. And again, on that, as with economics, the answer will come from what the country does itself. Right? We really, it will depend on what we do internally ourselves first.
There is a question which I think Ambassador Zamir Akram can answer. You said there's no other basket except the Chinese basket. But what about Pakistan's dependence on American-backed money, the IMF and the World Bank?
Okay, so let me first, because I have some knowledge of the nuclear issue, I just want to emphasize that we should not be concerned about IMF, World Bank pressures in any way affecting our nuclear policy. That policy is kept insured away from any kind of such pressures. We have sustained this policy and our nuclear capabilities have grown even when we were under widespread sanctions, as Dr. Lodhi had pointed out, Pressler and so many others. And so we had not given into that kind of pressure, and there is no likelihood that we would in the future. Now, as far as the question that has been asked about, yes, the answer to the FATF and the World Bank IMF pressure is domestic response, is basically what the other panelists have said, and I fully agree with them, that we need to be able to stand on our own feet, number one. If we cannot meet our expenses, instead of borrowing from the IMF, we need to increase our tax revenue. There's a whole lot of opportunities where we can raise revenue internally and meet our expenditure. So we would not need to go to the IMF. That's one. As far as the FATF is concerned, yes, it is unfair. I would just point out that at a time when we were not on the gray list, our performance on many of the issues that the FATF is asking us to do was much worse than it is today. But we were still not on the gray list because strategically our importance for the US and its Western partners was very much there, and they saw us as being cooperative. But since we are no longer seen as being cooperative, we are on the gray list. But having said that, of course, we need to do the kind of things that are in our own interest. And certainly, since this question was asked previously in the context of the nuclear, let me just stress that there is no connection between FATF and the nuclear program. So I think on that score, we should not be worried. But I think that is also important when we are talking about dealing with the pressures that the pressure that is being exerted on us and will be exerted on us in the future. My point is that one of the opportunities for us, apart from doing things that we need to do at home, is to look for opportunities with partners that are willing to work with us. China is one of them, and Mr. Lodhi was correct in saying that there is a whole big world outside. So yes, we need to look at other partners in our own region. There are other countries with whom we can work. Central Asia, the other countries of South Asia, and so we really need to broaden our horizons in terms of our foreign policy outreach.
Here's a question to all three panelists. In the introduction of his book, The China-Pakistan Axis, Andrew Small, who, as you know, is a famous writer, has quoted a Chinese general whose name I cannot pronounce, that Pakistan is China's Israel. This has been misinterpreted by proponents as well as detractors to come to the diametrically opposite conclusion. I would like to know what the take of today's panelists is on this statement. Pakistan is China's Israel.
I can take a shot at this because I spoke on China, Pakistan. I have read Andrew's book, I have come across this quotation. I can't claim to know the thinking on the Chinese general side, but what the impression I gathered from this is that China considers Pakistan to be as important for China as in the United States considers Israel to be as important for the United States. So that's how I look at the way that this Chinese has categorized this relationship, that the importance of Pakistan for China is the same as the importance of Israel for the United States.
Well, there's another question relating to China. Considering the importance of CPEC for China, will the United States target CPEC in its containment policy? But actually, I think we have agreed that the policy is beyond containment now, it is confrontational. Ambassador Akram, would you like to answer that?
I think CPEC is already being targeted in many ways, in many different ways. One is, of course, to make this argument globally and also in the context of Pakistan that this has created a debt trap for Pakistan, which was very strongly argued by the previous Trump administration's officials, including in Pakistan. We generously provided them a platform for where they made these arguments. And of course, the response was both from the Chinese and Pakistani sides that Pakistan's debt is almost 90% to Western donors and institutions. And whatever debt that owes to China is either to Chinese companies, which is a private debt, in the sense that it is owned, it is loans that Chinese companies have extended either to Pakistani companies or to Pakistani semi-government, quasi or government institutions. And then there is the national Chinese government debt, which is on extremely generous terms. And in fact, most of the time, it is written off. So the Chinese debt trap, generally, according to an American assessment, issue is really a myth. But in the context of Pakistan, I think that this is overstated. But the problem is that we need to be clear in how we are going to deal with CPEC ourselves. There is, for instance, I think as I mentioned it in my talk, that from the Indian side, there is no doubt that there is sponsorship of terrorist groups that are targeting Chinese assets. The Chinese consulate in Karachi, if you remember, was targeted a year or so ago. Chinese workers in Gwadar are repeatedly being targeted. Even in Dasu, Chinese workers are being targeted. And I think that there is a link that exists between these kind of terrorist activities and the CPEC. And the third thing is that that both the Chinese, both the Americans and the Indians have raised this concern, a legal concern or objection, that CPEC passes through territory that is disputed, and that by that which they mean Gilgit-Baltistan. So both the Indians and the Americans have made that kind of argument. So these are the kind of pressures that are there on us, but we certainly need to be very clear in our mind because I'm not worried about these kind of pressures. What worries me more are doubts within Pakistan. I mean, I've heard some people talk about CPEC or this China relationship being a repeat of the East India Company and that kind of argument, which I think is simply nonsense as far as I'm concerned. But we need to be careful not to make such kind of remarks in the context of this cooperation with China.
There is a question for Ambassador Lodhi. How much importance do you give to the issue of direct communication between President Biden and Imran Khan? It is thrown up so much in the media. And how significant is this in the US-Pakistan relations context?
Masuma, I'll answer this and then I'll take your leave respectfully.
Yes, sir.
This question, I mean, I can only laugh at it.
Yes, I know.
Sadly, it's our own officials who turned this into a big deal. This shouldn't be a big deal. Although I think conversations between heads of government remain important. I mean, this is the kind of summit diplomacy which does make a difference. And I think this government's chief executive has been very, very weak in, he doesn't have a single international friend. So it's not just about Biden. There are some prime ministers or presidents who work these relationships very well. And there are some who just don't. They don't pick up a phone, they don't speak to them, they don't visit their countries often enough. So I would only say that it's not just about Biden and Prime Minister Imran Khan, which I think is unfortunately blown completely out of proportion. But I do think it's important for whoever happens to be the chief executive of our country to have these kinds of personal relation, build, not have, but at least try to build a relationship, whether it's with President Xi or it's with various prime ministers in Southeast Asia, important, Indonesia, Malaysia. I mean, these are all very important countries. And I think we don't do enough. I mean, we are still bogged down in the diplomacy of press releases and now Twitter. Diplomacy is a contact sport. There is no other way to describe it. So unless there is face-to-face or there is person-to-person, you really can't build relationships. And I can mention two people. I know people have very negative views or at least mixed views. President Musharraf was very good at building personal relationships. And of course, our star prime minister, Benazir Bhutto, was superb at building these relationships. So I think I would say that if we take a more general view, the role of these relationships in diplomacy, I would say they do play an important role. But at the end, it's the interests of countries that count. I would also add that. I mean, you can build a very good relationship with whoever you want, but if that country's interests do not align with yours or yours don't align with them, then you're not going to go very far. So I would have a sort of a view on this that, we should, our outreach is very, I would say three things. Our outreach is very limited. I think we need to reach out to many more countries. There are 193 countries who are members of the United Nations. one of whom we don't have diplomatic relations with, that's Israel. So, what are we doing with these countries? Not a lot. And the second thing I would say is that in this outreach, it's not just government to government, as Adil will, also endorse, and so will Zamir. We need to reach out to many more actors in the international arena who are crucial in defining the image of Pakistan and the perception of Pakistan abroad, as well as influencing their governments. They create either an enabling environment for governments to cooperate with us or a non-enabling environment. I mean, the parliaments of countries, Congress, I mean, I think we've not really either not understood it or we just don't do enough of it. And the third thing I would say, we need to build these relationships, personal relationships, which can sometimes kick in at important times, and not build them, phone them when you need their support on a certain measure or a certain policy. I mean, for example, let's take Kashmir. We hardly discuss Kashmir. I mean, in Kashmir, I don't see any ongoing diplomatic effort. Does anybody keep in touch with these countries on Kashmir? No. But when there's an OIC meeting, we rush to these countries and say, could you please support us? I think that is not the way our diplomacy should work. We should have ongoing contacts with these countries and see whether it's in the Human Rights Council that Zamir Akram represented Pakistan so ably when we need their support. Look, today, you talk about FATF, and Adil is absolutely right in saying, what about the other countries in FATF? In the Human Rights Council, we've not even managed to get the support of countries who are members of the council to ask them for an exclusive session on Jammu and Kashmir. What does that say about Pakistan's diplomacy? It says that we are not reaching out to enough countries and we're not building support. We still are relying on 2.5 countries. I won't tell you which the half country is, but I'll end it.
Perhaps there are not enough diplomats. For too many countries, we need a larger foreign service.
That is true.
Thank you so much, Maleeha. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masuma. Thank you very much. And thank you, Adil and Zamir.
Okay. So I will now, we are going on to 5 o'clock, and I will just, unless you'd like to say something, Ambassador Zamir Akram, would you like to say something in the end?
I just wanted to add something about the last issue that we were talking about. Is I mean, to add to the issue of reaching out, I think we also need to be more hard-nosed about leveraging our importance or leveraging what we are doing. And when we talk about, I was laughing when you were asked this question about this phone call, because, this is, it's like a storm in a teacup. It doesn't really, and it should be very clear. It sends a very clear signal why Mr. Biden is not talking to Prime Minister Imran Khan. It's nothing to do with Prime Minister Imran Khan. But it's everything to do with Pakistan, because Mr. Biden, like all other Americans, blames Pakistan for the mess that they have been in Afghanistan. And he's been dealing with this issue when he was vice president, and he probably brings a lot of personal angst to this whole, the way that things have turned out. And so I think that's the way that he has, that's how he sees Pakistan. And the other question is, even if there is a conversation on the phone or wherever it is, it's not going to be a very productive, positive conversation. It's going to be a pretty negative one in the present circumstances. So I think and I blame some of our officials, not the professionals, not my colleagues in the Foreign Office, but others who have been saying these things, on and off on the public realm about the phone call and and we have options and all those other kind of things. This is really very petty, and I think we should be above this. But what is more important is that we should use the leverages that we have more effectively, and we still have a lot of leverages, but that's not what we do. It's always about give and take, and we don't do that.
Well, with respect to this President Biden call, I think people are also very influenced by what they watch on the media. And the media has thrown this up so badly that especially the young people who have joined this webinar are influenced by what they hear. We've run out of time, and it's my very, very pleasant duty to thank all these speakers. Ambassador Lodhi has left, but Ambassador Zamir, Akram, and Dr. Adin Najam. Thank you, Adil, for getting up so early in the morning to be with us. And I can only say that I can see this relationship between Pakistan and the United States in the future, maybe also as it was in the past, in relation to the regional context, very much in relation to the regional context. I know there's been a change in the global order also, but with respect to the changes we've seen in the region recently and how we take our relationship forward with Afghanistan will, I think, be crucial. Thank you very much, all of you, especially all those who have joined us, because many people have joined us from many, many institutions. And I hope we can get together on another occasion. I will now sign off. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Nadal.